This Kiwi property investor thought he was going to make $700,000 buying this property and selling it for way more. But as you're about to find out, he actually lost $754,000. And if you don't want this to be you, you need to know the 7 signs you're buying the wrong property. So in this episode, you'll learn what these 7 signs are and how to spot them, so that by the end, you'll know exactly how to avoid a bad buy before it costs you hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, I saw this amazing story, Andrew, on Radio New Zealand. There was this buyer called Mr. Singh. Now, Mr. Singh signs up to buy a property in Auckland at the absolute peak of the market.
So a few years ago.
Yep, in 2021, and he agrees to pay about $1.9 million to buy a property, right? He does it at auction, right? And this was well above what the real estate agents thought that this property was worth. Now, this buyer thinks he's pretty clever. He's seen property prices go up, and so he negotiates for what's called a deferred settlement. And then for anyone new to the show, what's a deferred settlement?
He's just going to pay for it later on. So he's not going to be able to move into it, but he's basically agreeing to the price, $1.9 million today. I'll pay you next year.
And so the couple are like, sweet, that's all good. We can still live in this for a year. And then he's like, okay, I know I'm signed up. I have to buy this property, but I'm going to sell it straight away. So I'm going to find another buyer to buy this property off me at a higher price. And then rather than me having to pay Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I'll just take the money, pass it on to them, and I'll keep the extra if I sell it at that higher price.
So he's thinking, okay, I've got these people on the hook to sell it to me. I've paid them a little bit of a margin, and they've given me this discretion to have another year. He's allowed to, because now he's essentially the owner, even though he doesn't own it yet. Because he's got a contract and he's paid a deposit, he can go find another buyer. And in the event that that person will pay more money, it'll change hands on the same day, for example, and he'll just margin the difference.
So he reckons he's going to make a couple of $100,000. So as soon as he's unconditional, he puts a for sale sign out the front.
Oh, imagine if you were the people that sold to him.
I think their name actually was Mr. and Mrs. Smith, actually. But yeah, keep going.
Small Ridge. Imagine how you'd feel like you've taken on that deal thinking, okay, we've got a really good price for that. And then all of a sudden you get the sign put out and that sneaky buyer is just going to sell that property for more money. I could understand how that would feel a bit gross.
Well, the sellers actually said it was okay that he could find another buyer. But they were like, no, we didn't agree to you putting a for sale sign out the front, right? But we did agree to have viewings. Now, here's the interesting thing.
They said yes to viewings.
Mr. Singh did get a buyer interested at $2.15 million. So that's about 250 grand more than he bought this property for.
Okay.
He rejected it. What? He wanted an extra $300,000.
No.
He wants about $2.4 million for this property. And then the market tanks. Auckland prices drop like a stone. He still has to buy the property for $1.9 million. Can't find anyone to buy the property off him. Can't get the money. So the current owners, they need to resell it. They end up selling it for just over $1.1 million. And then Mr. Singh is on the hook for $750,000 because they sold it for about $750K less than what he had signed a contract to pay. He's still on the hook for those $750,000 worth of damages.
I think that's something that people forget. So people think if I pay a deposit, so Mr. Singh might have thought, I'll pay my 10% deposit, for example, or maybe even negotiate a 5% deposit. So I paid 100 grand as my deposit. And then when he can't find a buyer and defaults on the settlement, he's still responsible for the losses that they incur. It's not like you just pay the deposit and walk away. So they could potentially bankrupt him if he can't pay that money.
And because properties are worth so much cash, right, and the risks are so large, that's why people need to understand these 7 signs that they are buying the wrong property. So what is the first sign?
Sign number 1 is you're chasing a booming market. So in this example, Mr. Singh ultimately was chasing a booming market. And it can be like, obviously what he's done here is he's snatched defeat from the jaws of victory by rejecting a very, very good offer. He could have made a couple of $100 grand. He's lost, say, almost $1 million because he's just that little bit greedy, chasing the boom. And I think you've got to look at a market if you're looking, particularly if you're doing a flip or something like this or a contemporaneous settlement, a market that's already kind of had that rise, you've got to be really careful and thinking, okay, well, 12 months down the track, maybe that's going to peter off or maybe it's going to pull back, because if you're doing that, as soon as that starts dropping, fewer people are buying, it can erode your profits and get into the negatives really, really quickly. And I think there's a real risk of that in even today's market. So right now, if I were looking at doing a deal like this, I would say, okay, well, Auckland's undervalued. Maybe there's an opportunity there. Maybe there's a way I can make money there. Maybe a little bit less so in Christchurch. I might be able to do the same thing. But if you take somewhere like Invercargill, right? Right now, prices have been pretty hot. Like they're up about 19% since the trough. And the QV index shows 8.2% annual growth last year. So it's one of the strongest regions around. And you might think, wow, Invercargill is going really well. That's an opportunity. I can get some quick gains. But here's the thing. Let's say house prices in Invercargill are only going to go up 40% this boom. And they're already up 19%. So you've only got 21% left. Like just made up numbers. Whereas if you go to an area like Auckland again, because we haven't started to have that recovery yet, you might have 40% that you can still gain out of this next boom.
Well, I suppose if you think about one of the greatest investors in history, Warren Buffett, right? He doesn't look at NVIDIA and say, oh, NVIDIA's booming. I've got to get in pretty quickly. I better buy some shares and then I'm going to sell them in a year's time and I'm going to make all this money. His whole idea is I'm going to go around looking for undervalued companies and I'm going to buy and I'm going to hold for 40 years rather than chasing whatever's booming at the moment. And I think that we apply that logic, and the logic's pretty clear when we're talking about shares. We don't necessarily apply the same thinking to property. I think the second sign that you're buying the wrong property is if you've only looked at the rent and the mortgage. Now, this doesn't matter whether you're a first home buyer or you're an investor. What so many people do is they go to a mortgage calculator.
Here's one you prepared earlier.
Well, it's not because I'm having to type it in.
That was my joke.
Make it funny next time. They go to a mortgage calculator and they say, okay, rightio, I'm going to borrow $500,000 to buy this property and it's going to cost me a weekly payment of $591. Okay, the mortgage is $591. The rent is $600 a week. So sweet, it's all good. It's paying for itself.
Good deal.
But what they haven't factored in, and this is both first-home buyers and investors, are things like rates and insurance and maintenance and property management, or if you are a property investor, vacancy, because you aren't going to have a tenant in there 52 weeks of the year. Sometimes the tenant's going to give notice and is going to move out. That'll happen roughly every 2 years, depending on what you've bought. So you're not always going to have a tenant in there. And those non-mortgage costs can add up to $8,000 to $11,000 a year, and that's even before we start thinking about the mortgage as well. And the issue that I see is that sometimes both investors and first home buyers start struggling because they face all of these costs that they weren't actually thinking about. And if you're not sure whether the property that you're looking at is going to pass all of these 7 tests, I've actually put together this checklist that you can use when you buy a property. It includes the 23 steps that our property team uses when they're looking for new build investment properties for our clients. And you can download it with the link below. I'll put that down in the description so you can get it all. What's sign number 3?
Sign number 3 is when you start to look for a Frankenstein property. And what I mean by that is there are properties which are higher growth and they will go up at a faster rate than other properties, but they tend not to have as good cash flow. And then there are yield properties which have better cash flow, but they typically won't go up in value as fast as high growth properties. Now, there's just a trade-off. Like that's just the way that it works. You can be high growth or you can be high yield. And it's not always a straight line. Most people, what I find they do is they buy the property that they're comfortable with and they kind of make the yields work, or they just buy somewhere in the middle. And as a result, like they buy properties that are lemons. They're neither great growth or neither great yield. And I just think it's because people don't set their buying criteria at the start. I had a podcast listener email me at the weekend actually, and because I've got 2 kids now and no life, I was sitting answering emails at Saturday night at like 10 o'clock, and they were looking for exactly this. They're like, we want a really good growth property with really great rental income. I was like, Don't we all? And so then kind of started to tease out, well, what's your priority? Because once you figure out what your priority is, wealth later or cash flow now, then you can start to actually analyze what's right or wrong.
Now, sign number 4 is if you're thinking like a homeowner as opposed to an investor. Now, this one really impacts first-time investors. So if you are buying that first investment property, maybe you've only ever bought a house for yourself to live in, right? And so the way you're used to looking at houses is just like you normally do. So you look for what sort of house would you specifically like to live in? And I always think, well, if you already own a house and you're looking to buy a second one, you're above average income. You're not the average person anymore, right? Your incomes and your wealth will be above average. And so typically what I see, the mistakes I see first-time investors do is they look for things like a pool or being close to shops or being in a good school zone, right? And because I now am married to a financial advisor, we talk a lot about shares at home. And we were driving in the car the other day, and I said, it is exactly like my food bag. So do you remember when my food bag listed on the stock exchange, right? And I mean, there are a number of reasons why my food bag has absolutely tanked, right? When it listed, I think it opened at about $1.75 a share, and now it's trading at like 20 cents a share, right? It has absolutely tanked. But I think the way that unsophisticated investors go about investing in shares is go, I like my food bag.
I buy my food bag.
I buy my food bag.
Makes
That's
sense.
a great
It's a no-brainer.
I like the company. I know something about that product because I've purchased it in the past. So I've got some insider knowledge because I've used Nadia Lib's sources in the past. So I'm going to buy those shares. But actually, that doesn't mean that $1.75 that it opened at or whatever it happened to be was a fair price for the company. It didn't mean that it was a well-run company. Ultimately, the share price is absolutely tanked. Now, I used my food bag. I thought it was a pretty good product, especially during lockdown. But just because I'd used it in the past didn't mean that the share was a good investment. And just because you might own a home where you think the school zone's good or it's got a pool or this sort of house suits me, it would suit me absolutely fine, it doesn't mean that it's a good investment, because when we're thinking about investment, we've got to think about the rent and the cash flow and how much you're paying for the property. Whoops, I got smashed my keyboard because I was so intense and passionate about the price you pay for the property. All of these things matter as opposed to the pool or close to shops or all of these other things, right? So when you make investments, you can't be in that consumer mindset, right? We've got to be doing things differently, and it starts with the numbers first as opposed to thinking about, well, would we live in this, Deirdre? Do we really like this? To be honest, the average person listening to the show it probably is not married to a person called Deirdre because most people are in their 30s rather than their 90s. Sorry, somebody's going to be called Deirdre listening to this and get very offended by that.
That was a great example, by the way. My food bag was a moment of clarity in your
Attic of my mind.
Sign number 5 is when you actually don't know what you're buying. And again, that's kind of like those people I was talking about before where, they think they know what their criteria is, but they don't. And you wouldn't believe how many people buy properties and they don't know exactly what it is they're buying. And I'll give you 2 examples. Let's use new builds because that's something we specialize in. There are 2 types of new builds. People just think, oh, it's new, they're all the same. It's not the case. So you can buy a turnkey new build where you go to a developer and you're buying a completed property that's yet to be built. So it's you're going to buy it when it's finished. You're not going to be responsible for the construction or the build overruns or any of those kind of things. You pay a deposit, you settle at the end. That's
at a fixed price.
At a fixed price. That's what a turnkey is. Now, you can also have a build where you buy the land, you engage the builder to build the product on top, you're responsible for the landscaping, you're responsible for some of the appliances, all of those kind of things. And that's called a progressive payment build. Now, with those, they can often seem cheaper because if you see them online, you'll see, and we did a video on this years ago. I was trying to find it at the weekend, but basically you're buying the land, it might be 200 grand, and you might be building the house that might be 300 grand. You think 500,000 is a really good value. But then the turnkey might be, let's call it 530. Now, by the time you buy the land and you build the house and you make stage payments and you pay interest on the mortgage you're taking out which is increasing over the next 6 months, 9 months while it's being built. Then you pay for all the extra stuff. All of a sudden, this one might cost more than the turnkey build, but because you didn't know the difference of what you were building, well, then you've taken on more risk because with a progressive payment build, you're responsible for those overruns, and you might end up paying more money anyway, all because you got suckered into a different type of product.
And specifically with that, I think the part that people really don't understand is with a turnkey, for instance, you are buying the finished product at a fixed price. If you are going down a progressive payment, you are hiring the builder to build you the house. Now, if the builder takes more time, whose problem is that? That's yours. You're the one who's got to pay more money to the bank because you got those mortgage payments, even if you've got a fixed price contract. If they have to sub out different materials or, oh, we can't get that one, we've got to do something else, all of it becomes your problem as opposed to the developer's problem. And I think that's the part that people don't realize. Like if I hire a plumber to come and do a service at my house, like if it takes twice as long, that's my fault. Well, it's not my fault, but I'm the one footing the bill.
Your responsibility.
I'm the one who's responsible for fitting the bill. You know, if it's something different like
Come on, Eddie, you can do it.
Buying a tap, I'm buying a product. I just go to the shop and I buy that. You know, so it's not like, oh well, actually that tap took us a lot longer to make. I don't care. I'm buying it. It's finished now.
And look, I did say before, you got stitched into it, making it sound like you as the buyer should have known better. And to be fair, like if you're making a big transaction, you do want to do a bit of research first. But I do know that builders can sometimes make it, or developers can make it a bit misleading online. Like you see on Trade Me ads for a property and they'll say $500,000. But again, they don't tell you that that's not going to actually be a finished product. Like, yeah, it can be a bit misleading.
Okay, we got two more. What's sign number 6?
Sign number 6, I've been guilty of it. This is what we call the gunner property. So I'm going to do something with it. I'm going to develop it one day. I'm going to put some units on the back of it. And I often talk about the example of Wilson's Road, which was my gunner property. This was a property that my parents owned. It had a large section that was suitable for development. It was like 550 square meters of developable land. And I thought, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to buy it. I can't develop it right now because I don't have any money, but I can renovate it. I can rent it out. We'll do that for so many times, so many years, and then I'll put some units on it. And then 10 years later, I'd still done nothing with it other than just had it as a rental. It was an old house, like it was a 100-year-old house. The maintenance was horrific. And had it not been for a major upswing in the market and then I could have exited it and sold it to another developer that did nothing with it, I would have just been, in a hole there. So many people, and I guess you can say, well, I still made money out of it. So what was wrong with that? Well, I did because I waited long enough. And if you wait long enough, you tend to make money out of property. But that property did hold me back because it was a property, it was data in my portfolio that I often have to think about, but also it was money that was tied up in that I couldn't exit and put into something more useful.
And sign number 7 is if you're skipping due diligence, right? Now, you wouldn't believe that so many people will say, I don't want to spend $500 on a building inspection because that costs money. I'll just get my brother's dog's uncle's cat to inspect the property for me.
But then when they buy a car, they'll pay $200 for an AA check.
Is that what happens?
Yeah, 100%.
You see, I don't buy enough cars to be able to know. I'm not fancy like you, Andrew.
Nor do I.
But what you can find is that $500 or $1,000 building inspection could save you $300,000 in maintenance costs that you could avoid by not buying a dud property, or even better, you can use it to negotiate a better price. But when the average reclad, if you buy a leaky home, it might cost you $150,000 to $500,000 to reclad at the upper end to reclad a house because it's a leaky home, right? But if you could get a standard building inspection that costs $800, you can avoid that entire maintenance cost and really understand it. And I just think that we should never be skipping proper due diligence, right? It doesn't matter whether it's a hot market. It doesn't matter whether the auction's in 3 days. Get the building inspection. Do your proper checks on this house because you're ultimately going to pay $800,000 for it. Like if you were to buy a $300 dress, you would, which I just did last weekend. No, I didn't. I didn't.
Spent more.
I was going to say I buy them secondhand. No, and but now people are going to think that's what I actually do on my weekends. You would at least try it on and see if you look good, right? And I just think that we should.
I'll give you another example.
No, give me a better example.
That was a weird one.
Maybe we'll cut that whole one out, or it might make it.
No, leave that in. The people need to know what Ed does his weekends. I might be answering emails, but Ed's prancing around the house in a secondhand dress.
My mother listens to this show.
Yeah, she knows. She knows about you and your high heels. So I had a phone call literally today as I was driving into the office about someone who bought a property in Auckland and they've skimped on the property file. Now they're going to sell that property, and the agent came round and said, okay, cool, it's a 60 square metre house. And they said, no, it's not. 90 square metres. I'm just making up the numbers. And they said, oh, 60. It says here on the property file. Uh-oh, that extra room is not consented.
Oh.
And because they didn't do full due diligence, now they've got a property which has got an unconsented addition.
Yes.
That voids the insurance. They can't sell it until it's remedied, or not unless they sell it as is. That is a real problem.
Oh, that's going to cost some real money to get that all
and
consented.
Time and stress.
Well, and that's why if you're not sure whether the property that you're looking at passes these tests, you want to download that checklist I told you about. And that's where you can get that 23-step checklist that our property team actually use when they're looking for investments for our clients to just make sure that you're not buying that dud property. I'll drop that link down in the show notes where you're able to download it. So now you know the 7 signs you're buying the wrong property and what to check before you commit. But once you've found your first property, how do you keep growing your portfolio? Well, that's where you need to watch the next video, where you'll learn the 7 levels of property investment and how to move from wherever you are now all the way to potentially becoming a mega landlord. Click the video on the screen and watch it now.